Welcome everyone to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. For those of you joining us and don't realize, we are Britain's largest pro-marriage organization. We represent groups and individuals who support traditional marriage or one man, one woman marriage because we think it's important. We think it's a stabilizing bedrock of society and should be championed as such. Privileged to welcome a guest today, a very special guest, a barrister, Paul Diamond, a good friend to the Coalition for Marriage, one of a number of unsung heroes in the country who've spent their careers standing up for free speech, for religious freedoms, and for the sorts of things that actually give us all the liberty to live the lives that we live. Paul, would you like to say hi?
Hello, good to meet everybody.
Great to have you here, Paul. Now, what amazes me, Paul, is that a lot of people I've come across recently haven't heard of the Harry Miller case and the recent judgment in the Court of Appeal. And it strikes me that that's something a lot of people need to know about because things have been going on. Judgments have taken place in the Court of Appeal, which actually fundamentally affect all of our lives and could have impacts on everything that we do and say and think and the jobs we apply for and all sorts of things like that. So I wonder, would you mind just taking a couple of minutes telling us a little bit about the facts of the Harry Miller case?
Yes, well, Harry Miller was a citizen like the rest of us. He's obviously quite strong-willed, and he was tweeting on the transgender debate. And he, like many people, he had a range of tweets. Some were highly sophisticated, intelligent. Others, to put it crudely, were slightly more crude, just sort of not much above pub talk, if I could put it that way. Nevertheless, he was exercising his freedom of speech. And of course, in modern Britain, we all know what we can say or what we can't say. I'm going to mention some wider topics maybe a bit later, but if you enter the LGBT field, then it becomes a matter of great concern. And of course, Harry Miller was engaging on the transgender debate, and he was reported by a transgender individual, I believe. It was a very, very broad report, I understand it. There was no specific tweet identified. It was just, he is tweeting and we find this offensive. The police immediately responded in two ways. The first way is they communicated with Mr. Miller, and I think an officer attended at his workplace. You can imagine that for many citizens, a uniformed officer turning up at your place to discuss his tweets. Essentially, the officer was going on that I think he hadn't committed a crime, but he's essentially standing on eggshells. I don't think he used that phrase, but that was, and why do you want to participate in debates and politics when you offend people? Who's trying to, can you imagine that statement? Why would you want to participate in a public debate? Because people don't like what your views are. He was generally intimidated, and that was the purpose of the visit, to intimidate. And then he was recorded as a non-crime hate incident, which goes on to police records and has various functions. There were two court hearings. The first one was in the High Court, where the judge said the policeman visiting you was clearly intimidatory, clearly designed to prevent you exercising free speech. It was, I think the judge said it's equivalent to the Stasi in East Germany. He actually used that phrase. You've expressed a view that there isn't a new Soviet man and we don't live in utopia, so to speak, from Eastern Europe. That required a little visit to make sure that you express the right views in future. And that's the purpose. It's to, often people are disciplined in the workplace or humiliated in the workplace because that suffices to silence people, or investigations into what you may have said by employers. This is a very well-known tactic. But however, the judge at the first instance said the non-crime hate incident was reasonable for the police to record this because, they need statistics. It's obviously a very serious problem, hate crime, and the police should be aware of this, and this is part of their building dossiers on citizens, and you have to face reality. The police do that. You may not realize that, but they build dossiers all the time. So, but most of it, we would approve of it. Most of it, there's an incident at the park. Someone's attacked, perhaps, or threatened. The police record the names of everybody there, not for the purposes they can bring a criminal charge. There isn't enough evidence, there isn't a witness. But if there are 2 or 3 of them, and then there is something happens, they know whose door to knock on, if I could put it that way.
Yeah,
so the police have general recording functions on, incidents that don't amount to crimes, but may amount to a crime. And the judge said this falls into that category. It's an incident. It's sooner or later, Mr. Miller may say something he regrets. And then they know they've got his little history before them.
As I understand it, Paul, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've got this thing called the College of Policing, which is a private company which is owned by the Secretary of State primarily, but the chair is supposedly an independent chair, etc., etc. And this College of Policing comes up with guidelines that the police in the country have to follow. And they'd come up with this guideline of recording a non-crime hate incident, whereby if anybody gets in touch with the police and says, well, I feel hurt or offended by something somebody did or said, that has to be written down and recorded, irrespective of whether it's reasonable that they should or could have got offended. But not only that, but that record is potentially available to anybody doing a DBS check. So a check on you were you to apply for a job that requires a police check. So theoretically, you may have said something as an individual which is completely innocuous and completely within your rights to say, I disagree with the fact that a man can think he's a woman. Somebody else takes offense for that. That gets recorded as a non-crime hate incident. It's not a crime. Somebody doing a DBS check on you, applying for a teaching post or whatever, is told you have a non-crime hate incident, you don't get the job. And that's incredibly serious.
Yeah, well, the Court of Appeal said, certainly you can't record it as the police were recording it as effectively transphobic. All this actually stems back to the Macpherson report in the late 90s and the Stephen Lawrence case. And the Macpherson report told the police they must record all hate incidences. Purpose at the time is that you need to give confidence to the racial minority communities that you take everything seriously, even if it doesn't amount to a criminal charge. And as the ground of protected groups expands, it's been extended to the transgender community. They must record it. And they record it in a very crude fashion. That it's absolutely absurd how it's done. There's the court comments on it. They make no distinction between a political comment or a sophisticated comment or a comment by a leading academic or pub talk. Well, pub talk's still lawful in this country. The actual definition they used of hate, which the police used, they include words like unfriendliness, dislike. So if you aren't friendly and positive, if you dislike the fact that someone can self-declare their gender, that falls within the Macpherson and police definitions, and they must record. And if there's an enhanced check, there are some pathetic safeguards. You can object, but these things are worthless, I can assure you, because you'd have to have vast sums of money and time, and whatever job you've had would have gone by the scandal of challenging it. They have to reveal the details, and it was written, anybody looking at the police report on Mr. Miller would have thought he was vile, transphobic, had nothing intelligent to say, and he was not allowed to participate in any political debate of any sort, which is the purpose of this law.
And it has kind of the term chilling effect. So
well, that's really what the interesting thing of the judgment is. I mean, the judgment's really interesting because they focus on chilling effect. That's actually an American judicial concept. And our courts have been very loath to go down this chilling effect role because it's slightly more nebulous. It's not a direct result, but it's about intimidation. That if people, the Americans developed the chilling effect doctrine from the early 60s when there were some politically correct decisions and teachers didn't want to teach on subjects, and they came up with the concept of these politically correct decisions are having a chilling effect, and that became a cause of action in itself. And that was very interesting that they used this concept chilling effect. And the chilling effect, of course, in this case, you can't debate, you have to modify your conduct, you should not participate in political grounds, you should not express any opposition on this. And Mr. Miller's had two things probably in his favor. He's clearly, and one is his personal characteristics, he's clearly a very robust individual who's going to say what he wants to say, probably sort of relatively financially secure and in a position to do so. He's not newlywed or something with a young family.
I think he got pretty much in a hole from a legal fees perspective.
Yes, but then of course he was taken up by a group that managed to sort of crowdfund, and this may be the way forward for lots of people now.
And not many people have got the wherewithal to take the police to court and to say, hold on.
I mean, I think what I'm going to say is I'm going to slightly expand it. I mean, that's why I use the example. A lot of the cases I've done in the past, there's a lot of difference between a professional person, if I'm being blunt about it, had the fruits of a very successful career, probably 1 or 2 years off retirement, wouldn't mind going a bit earlier, if you get my meaning, deciding to make a stink. That is a very different type of person for someone in their mid to late 20s, as I said, newly married, possibly a couple of young children, can barely make mortgage payment. And then you say, put yourself on the line for 3 weeks in the press, and there's going to be an awful lot of hardship flowing from that. I think what I want to say is, I think after many years, when many people felt the courts weren't particularly good, if I could put it that way, they have come good. There's now quite a lot of decisions which are actually quite good in a lot of areas. The Miller case, I did a case called Ngoli a couple of years ago, where a student was able to express his biblical views and not be thrown out of the University of Sheffield.
Yeah, we're familiar with Felix. We've had a chat with him. Wonderful guy.
And I think there's a lot of argument now that the courts are coming good, and there's been quite a good decisions. What is still at fault is that you've still got to go to court, and court is not easy. If you're not picked up by one of these big organizations, or you haven't got a lot of money yourself, or you're not an expert at crowdfunding, it's a traumatic experience. And what is clear is that these cases are still happening, and the government is still not standing for freedom, not giving clear directions to the police, not making a statement. And there is still this fear in our society of genuine freedom and people expressing views. I'm doing a case at the moment where someone was disciplined for what he put on his website 10 years ago, actually promoting traditional marriage and against same-sex marriage, and he's been disciplined.
And this is where the rubber hits the road from our perspective, Paul, because we believe that one man, one woman marriage is special, and that's the only real form of marriage which society should promote and embrace, because it has commensurate benefits to children, to adults, to wider society in a way that nothing else does. And the literature is very clear on that. The international body of literature is very clear on the value of marriage. And we want the freedom to be able to stand up and say, this is the thing that matters. And all those other things are fake imitations of this. This is the only thing that should be promoted. If government's going to get involved in human relationships and who loves who, this is the only way they should be getting involved to promote this, because this is the good thing. There's always somebody attacking some aspect of marriage somewhere. So that just keeps going on. We seem to be a society just bent on undermining every aspect of the definition of marriage.
And my answer to you is going to be a bit positive and negative. My answer to you is, so long as, make it easy for yourself, so long as you express it rationally and reasonably and don't sort of be vulgar and crude.
Yep.
I'll win any court case for you in any court, and you'll win, and you can pat yourself on the back and say we won.
Yeah.
The reality is you will be vilified by the media.
Yeah.
You will lose any discretionary grants, or you'd have to have a series of legal actions. Could Bristol City Council not fund you on this project because of your private views? And it'd be a very complex case, you know what I mean?
You'll lose your job.
Duties. You would be subject to amazing hostility, probably again even at police level, because the situation is not cured. These sort of slightly abstract legal judgments show we're moving in the right direction, but they're not filtering down into the system. Employers will still discipline people. They're not going to say, well, I've read the Miller judgment, you're entitled to tweet. They're going to say, well, I think this is different, or I'm not having this in my workplace because I'm terrified of losing the government contract, or whatever it's going to be. And so I think what I'm saying is it's a wider issue. I think what's actually surprised people is what's happening in the United States, where I think there were parents complaining about critical race theory being taught in the schools. The Attorney General calls the FBI in. Well, that's not a joke, calling the FBI in. And it's much worse what happened to Mr. Miller. And don't think the FBI aren't going to have lots of tracks and details and followed and studied all these parents who had the audacity to complain. It's the power of the state to impose its ideology. It's no longer a neutral state saying, well, our job is to administer the state, produce law and order. Private citizens can choose their own good way to live. That's true liberalism. That used to be what the liberals argued, that the state should be Christian, should just be a neutral state that should enable the citizen to choose the good life as he thought best. And that was the classic liberal things, even from John Stuart Mill's days in the mid-19th century. That was the liberal position. That is not the position now. The position now is private citizens must think as they should think correctly. We're going to do it by nudge at the moment. It's not quite camps and this, but we're going to nudge. You will have a tough time at work. You won't get that government grant. You may have difficulty getting your child into some position or whatever. We will look back, and it's totally arbitrary. It's clearly ideological. So you are free. You have got free speech. You can say it. But as we both know, whether you'll get access to that government minister, whether you'll be invited on Newsnight to give your views on it, it's a turbulence you have to go through.
It creates that chilling effect, doesn't it? Really?
It creates that chilling effect. And that may be a very interesting facet of the Miller judgment, is that they've really endorsed this chilling effect. So I think what I would say is, in a slightly more sort of wider thing, I think the courts are now coming good, and there's been a series of quite good judgments, and I think people can have a degree of greater confidence. I think the courts are now realizing, and even when they did the Miller case, I mean, they're looking at how absurd it is. Someone just says they're offended, and you get a policeman coming round and you're reported, and anybody of lesser strength would have just folded. They'd have never tweeted again.
There should be nothing that you can't talk openly about. But beyond that, there was an incident of a police authority going into a town centre with one of these lorries with a large poster on the side of it saying, causing offence is an offence. And that's factually and literally incorrect. It is not. And it's absolutely wrong for a police force to say that. And you've got to wonder, I mean, there must have been a string of senior people involved in authorizing and publishing and designing that kind of thing to go on the side of a lorry in a town centre. What on earth is going on?
I think there is an agenda. You know, as we've mentioned, human rights is an agenda. Some people have greater human rights than others, and these laws have political purposes. I mean, I think a lot of people feel very disempowered. They feel they know their views or religion won't be respected very much, and they know it's dangerous to speak out or voice too forcefully what you would think. But you know, actually, I think it's over many areas of our society, and there's very little debate on a lot of subjects, and marriage is one of those subjects. Someone who says, "I believe marriage is between a man and a woman," it is very, very difficult. We haven't got a culture of freedom. So I mean, what the Miller case shows us, that's how bad it is. You're in Lincolnshire. 2 years ago, you're, if I may say so, a nobody running a small business. No one's interested in your views at all. In fact, the police made the biggest doo-doo they could ever do. They should just let him go. No one would have looked, you know, I don't know how many followers he had. But you are sitting in Lincolnshire tweeting away, and you've got officers coming round to your workplace, making your position impossible, and you're being recorded as if you're a hate-filled sort of, you know, deranged
I think
monster.
So if I'm reading you right, you've said, so just a message for people really is that it's okay to believe that marriage should be between one man and one woman, and irrespective in a liberal democracy of what may take place in other areas with other relationships and love is love and all that stuff, but actually marriage being between one man and one woman, that being your opinion, is not only okay, but the courts have said it's worthy of respect in a democratic society. The statute books say that discussing and disagreeing with other people's views around marriage is not in it and of itself threatening or hatred.
Well, I think what I'd say, firstly, just you're right, we have freedom of speech in Britain. We actually have freedom in speech in Britain. It includes the very innocuous view that marriage is between a man and a woman. And I think what you're saying is the chilling effect of the state is working, because I'm sure a lot of your supporters probably ring you up and say, can I give a leaflet out? Can I give a sermon on this?
Can
I attend a public meeting and say this?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, but our MPs, dare I say, there was an anonymous Comres survey among MPs October 2018, which over half of those who responded said that they were too fearful to express their real opinions on some of these issues. Now, these are our lawmakers who are too scared of being vilified by the media and by the mob if they say what they really think and presumably vote how they really feel. Now, at some point, somebody's got to stand up and say, hold on, enough is enough. You know, we are a land built on freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, you know, and obviously there has to be sensible constraints, shouting fire in a crowded theatre, all that stuff. But what do we do in that case? You've said the courts have made some good and useful and healthy decisions, and they have done. There have been one or two dodgy ones recently relating to statutes and other stuff, which is beyond our remit. But what advice would you give us as a Coalition for Marriage, as there are, you know, tens and hundreds of thousands of people up and down the country who support one man, one woman marriage? What advice would you give us? I think
you're asking for sort of free legal advice, and don't take advice, but I'll do my best.
Can I just let me on that point? You are, of course, available for
I'm of course available, and my details will be on your website.
There's only one wonderful Paul Diamond, and you're very easy
to
well, I think use your services. Absolutely right. Free advice.
I mean, obviously, what we're talking about is the rise of chilling effect, and I can actually tell you, I'm so old. I remember when we had genuine free speech in the 1990s, and people could say what they wanted, and people said a lot of offensive things, and there was genuine culture freedom then. And then the Human Rights Act came in, and it was portrayed as this human rights on steroids, but it was just I'm going to say it was a political agenda. It had nothing to do, in my view, with genuine human rights. And we've got less freedom of speech now than we had in the 1990s. And I think it was so well accepted, freedom of speech in 1990, and people were so sensible about it. It was actually inconceivable that in a matter of years so much would be lost. And I remember some of the debates at the time where we ought to limit some of the racially abusive language which was used in those days. And nobody thought, well, if we do this little bit of tinkering to free speech, the whole lot would collapse, because the structure at the time seemed so strong. So one of the great ironies is that we've lost so much, in my view, freedom since the introduction of the Human Rights Act. And actually, Britain, slowly evolving in the 90s, had achieved a very coherent balance. Now, for you as a group, your supporters need to be a bit Harry Miller-esque, if I could put it that way. You've got free speech. Miller proves you've got free speech. Ngoli proves you've got free speech. This case against Camden recently says you've got free speech, and your boss can't sack you for political expressions outside the workplace. The decisions are coming through. What isn't coming through is the culture in our society, a scared government where MPs will not support you because they're absolutely terrified, etc., etc. A media that not only won't interview you, that will probably vilify you and twist the story. As most, I'm afraid the fake news thing is as true as it could be, and your version of events will end up probably on the cutting room floor of some studio somewhere. So what you need to do is encourage your supporters to exercise their freedoms before they're intimidated not to lose them. And that was the whole purpose of Harry Miller. Police officers saying to you, well, why do you want to debate a subject if people are offended by you? And that's what they're going to say. You're offending people at Why do you want to debate it? Give up. It's not important. Why do you want to offend people, you wicked person? So you need to encourage your supporters to leaflet, to preach in the churches, or even the mosques, to attend public meetings and ask questions. You want them to be, obviously, because of the threat of vilification, you want the higher end of speech. Marriage is good for stability of children, or cohesion in society, avoid sounding prejudicial. And you just have to keep plodding forward. And I think the thing I'm anxious about is Miller isn't enough. Actually, the police will they'll redo their policy. It won't be recorded as a non-hate crime incident, non-crime. They'll redo it as some general collection of information, and they've got duties to do this, and the law works in a patchwork. I mean, they won't visit Mr. Miller's workplace again, but they may well visit Mr. Smith's in Liverpool's workplace. We've just got to keep the pressure up. It to some ways, 'twas ever thus, even in the good old days. You have to push forward on your agenda, and if people don't like what you're saying, whatever you are saying, they play dirty to silence you.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because everyone will agree, almost everyone will agree, that discrimination is just wrong based on someone's skin color or their sexuality or their religion or whatever else. It's just wrong. You treat everyone decently and with respect, and that's absolutely fine. But what seems to be happening is that activists seem to be taking rules which are there to protect innocent people and using them in a way which furthers their own ideological agenda, which actually almost inevitably ends up crushing innocent people along the way. And that's the thing that we really want to look out for and protect, really.
I think you've summed it up. There's all this very extreme ideology, and a lot of these bodies are endorsed by the state. That Stonewall gets huge grants, other bodies get grants. They've got the CPS, as in the Miller case, where they were mandatorily told to record. They couldn't put any common sense into it. Who knows? The chief constable of Humberside, I believe, where he was probably saying, this is the balmiest thing I've ever done in my life. But the guidance from the Home Office tell me I've got to record it. And I've got to defend it, even though I don't believe in it.
And that's it. Absolutely right. Let's not for a minute do anything other than recognize that most police are just trying to do a good job and a proper job, but they have to operate within constraints that are set for them by other people.
I think we ought to feel very sorry for the police, actually. They become sort of social workers of Britain almost, and they're being asked to engage in social engineering at the highest sophisticated levels. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. And the Bobby on the street is a decent working class man, probably a woman, doing their job to the best of their abilities, under strict orders to do much of this. And it's not their fault. You know, I'm sure most of them would rather be solving real crimes, or most people would perceive as real crimes. I mean, the resources that must have gone into this, and not just officers visiting and recording and visiting people and appearing as a social worker, but then to actually fight it to the Court of Appeal, and who knows, to the Supreme Court. They're not, you know, that's probably 40 officers on the beat lost on the legal fees.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Paul, yay for the judges, yay for the man on the Clapham omnibus, and yay for free speech. And can I want to thank you for being one of those silent heroes who behind the scenes actually fights for the freedoms of us all, and for our own ability to express our own beliefs in what we think is valid and precious to us. So thanks for doing that. Keep up the great work. Quick reminder, anybody is looking for a barrister who defends religious liberty, religious freedom, freedom of speech, well, you're easy to find. Paul Diamond. Thank you for all you're doing. All power to your elbow. May it go from strength to strength. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.